A teenage boy is banking his aircraft toward Moscow. Behind him stands the Soviet Air Defense Network, a machine built across decades to stop exactly this. Thousands of radar installations, hundreds of missile batteries, interceptor jets fueled and waiting on tarmacs around the clock. A system with a perfect record. Every single layer of that system will get its chance to stop him in the hours ahead. Every single layer will fail. If they bring him down, his name vanishes from history. If they don't, the most powerful military on earth becomes a punchline, and Gorbachev gets the excuse he needs to gut his own generals. Everything hinges on the next few hours. Who is this kid? How does he slip through? And why does a rented Cessna crack the foundations of an empire? The time is 2:29 p.m. Over Estonia, a dot materializes on a Soviet radar display. The operator squints. The object isn't answering the standard identification query. No flight plan filed, no clearance granted. No reason to exist in this airspace. He tags it 8255. Within minutes, 3 surface-to-air missile batteries receive targeting data. Their systems acquire lock. Fingers drift toward launch controls. This is the exact scenario they rehearsed 1,000 times. An unidentified aircraft breaching Soviet airspace without authorization. One order, that's all they need. The operator reaches for his phone, passes the contact up to his commanding officer. That officer passes it higher. The chain of command carries the decision upward and upward and upward. Nobody is willing to give the order. It's Border Guards Day, a Soviet military holiday. Half the senior brass are at banquets. Those still on duty want no part of this decision. Not after last time. Not after 1983. The authorization never travels back down. Object 8255 drifts east. The missile batteries hold their lock. The fingers stay still. And a teenager in a red flight suit, completely oblivious that 3 weapon systems just tracked him through their crosshairs, continues on course for Moscow. This should have been impossible. Soviet air defense wasn't merely a military apparatus. It was doctrine. It was faith. $100 billion, 500,000 personnel, the densest radar network ever constructed, engineered for a single purpose. Nothing crosses into Soviet airspace uninvited. Nothing ever had. In 1978, Korean Airlines Flight 9002 wandered off its route over the Kola Peninsula. Soviet interceptors launched. The aircraft was fired upon. 2 passengers died. Moscow called it a proportional response to a sovereign violation. In 1983, history repeated itself. Korean Airlines Flight 007, a Boeing 747 with 269 souls aboard, including a US congressman, strayed 200 meters off course over Sakhalin Island. A Soviet Su-15 interceptor launched 2 missiles. The plane plunged into the ocean. Everyone aboard perished. Global condemnation followed. The Soviets offered no apology. Their message was blunt. You cross into our airspace without clearance, you die. No exceptions, no warnings, no mercy. This was public knowledge. Every pilot on the planet understood it. Every foreign ministry understood it. The system had never hesitated. The system had never missed. Yet over Estonia, Object 8255 is still crawling east, unidentified, unauthorized, breathing. Something has broken inside the machine that never broke. The radar operators face a growing problem. Object 8255 keeps moving, keeps heading east, keeps ignoring contact attempts, and the ground batteries never receive their launch authority. So they push it higher. A MiG-23 interceptor rockets off a runway near Pushkin, the most capable Soviet fighter of its era. Armed, fast, ordered to investigate. The pilot locates the Cessna within minutes. He slides alongside, close enough to read the white paint, close enough to make out the civilian registration numbers stenciled on the fuselage, close enough to peer through the cockpit glass and see a young man in a red flight suit, who never even glances over. The pilot keys his radio. Small civilian aircraft, single engine, unidentified, bearing east toward Moscow, requesting weapons authorization. Silence from command. The pilot holds position. The Cessna holds course. He asks again. Nothing. Here's what is unfolding on the receiving end of that transmission. The senior officers remember 1983. They remember the global firestorm after KAL 007. They remember the headlines. Every front page screaming one word. Murderers. Downing a military aircraft? That's war. Downing what looks like a tiny civilian plane, some lost tourist maybe, that's something no one wants on their conscience. Nobody reaches for that trigger. Then something nobody planned for. At that exact moment, an AN-2 biplane lifts off from a local airfield below. A Soviet crop duster. Routine agricultural run. It appears on the same radar screen as the Cessna. 2 blips. Same zone, same altitude. The operators watch both signals drift together on their displays, pull apart, drift together again. One operator makes a call. He logs object 8255 as a domestic Soviet aircraft, probably the AN-2, and strips it from the threat register. One keystroke, one assumption. Done. The MiG pilot is still circling, still waiting for his order, when the radio crackles. Stand down, false alarm, return to base. He glances through his canopy one last time. The little white Cessna is still there, still pushing east, shrinking against the horizon. He banks and heads home. In the entire history of Soviet air defense, the same system that downed 2 Korean passenger jets without a second thought, a MiG-23 pilot just watched an unauthorized aircraft cruise toward Moscow and turned around because nobody picked up the phone. Object 8255 vanishes from the Soviet radar network completely, and Matthias Rust, oblivious to all of it, checks his compass, nudges his heading, and keeps flying. Moscow is 3 hours out. Rust is sitting in his cockpit at 600 meters above Soviet soil. He has no idea 3 missile batteries just locked onto him. No idea a MiG-23 pilot was waiting for clearance to kill him half an hour ago. No idea 2 radar operators classified him as a crop duster and went back to their coffee. He knows absolutely none of this. He's just flying. 18 years old, from a quiet suburb outside Hamburg. His parents believe he's sightseeing across Northern Europe. His flight instructor thinks he went home last week. 50 hours of total flight time. The legal minimum for solo international crossings is 40. He picked up flying 2 years ago, not out of love for aviation, out of fear. Nuclear fear. The kind that keeps you awake at 3 in the morning reading about warhead counts and blast radiuses. In 1986, Reagan and Gorbachev sat down in Reykjavik to discuss eliminating nuclear weapons entirely, the closest humanity had ever come to genuine disarmament. The summit fell apart in a single afternoon. Rust watched it collapse on television and arrived at a conclusion. If world leaders couldn't solve this, maybe someone else had to. Someone no one expected. Someone the Soviets would never see coming. He spent months planning, flew to the Faroe Islands, then Iceland, visited Hafliðahús, the very building where the summit failed, stood outside its locked door, thinking about what he was about to do. Then Helsinki, his last stop before Soviet airspace. 3 days he spent there, just sitting with the decision. Is this insane? Yes. Will it work? Maybe. Could he die? Almost certainly. On the morning of May 28th, he woke up, drove to the airport, filed a flight plan to Stockholm, and lifted off. Then killed his radio, and turned east. He has been airborne for 4 hours now. Below him, Soviet territory. Ahead, Moscow. Behind him, a trail of military alerts, baffled radar operators. His original plan, land inside the Kremlin itself. The courtyard is big enough, the symbolism flawless. A West German teenager setting down in the most guarded compound on Earth. But he thinks it through. If he touches down inside those walls, a handful of people witness it. KGB officers swarm him within seconds. They seize the aircraft, detain him quietly, erase the event from existence. No cameras, no witnesses, no story. He needs somewhere public, somewhere so exposed that denial becomes impossible. Red Square. He circles once, twice. Below him, thousands of tourists, school groups, Muscovites crossing the cobblestones on afternoon walks. The space is vast, but choked with bodies. Putting down here means striking someone, possibly several people. He pulls up, keeps circling. Then he sees it. The Bolshoi-Moskvoretsky Bridge. 6 lanes wide, sparse traffic, a clean approach vector from the river. If he comes in steep with full flaps, kills the engine at precisely the right instant, he can plant the Cessna on asphalt and taxi straight into the square. One problem. Trolleybus wires span both ends of the bridge and cut through the middle. Steel cables strung at exactly the altitude that would tear his wings apart on approach. On any ordinary day, this landing is physically impossible. Rust sweeps past again, looks closer. The wires are gone. Every last one. The bridge sits completely bare. What Rust doesn't know, what he won't learn for years, is that the Moscow City Maintenance Department pulled those cables down that morning. Routine repairs. A job scheduled weeks in advance. Nothing whatsoever to do with any of this. They reinstall them the following day. Rust has roughly 30 seconds to process what he's seeing before commitment becomes irreversible. He lines up his approach. Full flaps, engine at idle, steep descent over the first span. Below him, a Moscow driver in a battered Volga sedan is about to have the strangest morning of his entire life. Rust drops, flares, rubber meets pavement. He rolls forward, ducks beneath the remaining cables, taxis past St. Basil's Cathedral, those iconic candy-colored domes rising on his left, and brings the Cessna to a stop 200 meters from the Kremlin wall. He kills the engine. Silence. Nothing but the ticking of cooling metal and the distant murmur of the city. Then, people begin to notice. Rust pulls himself from the cockpit, looks around. 50 people already frozen mid-step, staring. Nobody panics. Nobody flees. This is Moscow, a city where the unexpected simply does not occur. So when it does, people gather and gaze. Someone asks where he's from. Germany, Rust answers. The crowd softens. East Germany, they assume. An ally, some kind of official demonstration. A woman pushes forward holding a loaf of bread, the traditional welcome offering. She presses it into his hands. He takes it, bewildered. Then someone requests an autograph. He signs it. Then another. Then another. Within minutes, Muscovites surround him, shaking his hand, snapping photographs, treating him like a scheduled public appearance. Then he clarifies. __quote, _0, __. The crowd falls silent. Nobody knows what to do, so they keep photographing. The KGB arrives 1 hour and 40 minutes later. As officers lead Rust away, someone in the crowd shouts something. He asks his escort what they said. No answer. What they said, Mikhail Gorbachev is attending a summit in East Berlin when an aide slips him a note. He reads it, says nothing for a long moment. Then, not a crisis, not a catastrophe, a gift. Here's why. Gorbachev has spent 2 years trying to reform the Soviet Union. Glasnost, perestroika, openness, modernization, a controlled dismantling of the old architecture before it crumbles under its own weight. But the military blocks everything. 150 senior generals and defense officials, men who built entire careers on the old order, on secrecy, on paranoia, on a $100 billion air defense apparatus, have been quietly strangling his reforms at every turn. Too radical, too dangerous, too fast. Gorbachev needs them removed. But you cannot simply fire 150 generals, not in the Soviet Union, not without cause. Matthias Rust handed him exactly that. Within 7 days, Gorbachev purges Minister of Defense Marshal Sokolov, Commander of Air Defense General Koldenov, more than 150 senior military officers swept out, the largest military shake-up since Stalin's terror. Every one of these men had stonewalled his reforms. Their replacements? Loyalists. Officers who nod when told to nod. For the first time, Gorbachev controls the military apparatus he needs to ram his agenda forward. Reform accelerates. The Soviet system, built to be rigid, centralized, airtight, begins cracking under the weight of its own loosening grip. Protests erupt in the Baltic states, then Georgia, then everywhere. Governments Moscow held together through raw force for decades start questioning, then demanding, then declaring independence. 1989, the Berlin Wall falls. 1991, the Soviet Union stops existing. An 18-year-old kid with 50 hours of flight time and a rented Cessna had accidentally delivered the most powerful reformer in Soviet history, the single weapon he could never manufacture on his own. A pretext. Rust spent 14 months locked inside a Moscow detention center. He walked free as a goodwill gesture, time to Reagan and Gorbachev signing a nuclear arms treaty. His Cessna sits today in the German Museum of Technology in Berlin. And the Soviet Union, the empire that poured $100 billion into guaranteeing nothing ever breached its borders, is dust. One teenager, one switched-off radio, one rented plane.